In this lesson, we will learn how to determine if two functions are inverses of one another. So first, it's important to understand what an inverse is. A one-to-one function, we just discussed what one-to-one functions are, has an inverse if both are true. So if both f of g of x gives me x, and g of f of x gives me x for all of those values in the domain of either function. Most of the time that you see inverse, you will see it written as f to the negative first power, which just tells us that that's an inverse. So the definition up here means that f of f inverse of x equals x, and f of x equals x. Let's practice one together. Again, in order to determine if they are inverses, I'm going to find f of g of x, and if I get x, then I'm going to check g of f of x. So I'm finding f of, remember g of x is this whole function, so I'm finding f of 1/5 x plus 2, which means I'm using this function and I'm replacing x with 1/5 x plus 2, but I still have my minus 10. I'm going to distribute 5, so 5 times 1/5 is x. 5 times 2 is 10. I still have my minus 10. Notice plus 10, minus 10 cancel out, and I just get x. So far, so good. Now I'm going to check g of f of x the exact same way. So now I'm finding g of 5x minus 10, which means I'm finding 1/5 of 5x minus 10 plus 2. If I distribute, again, I get x. I get minus 2. I have a plus 2 on the outside. Those two values cancel, and that gives me x. So yes, they are inverses of one another. Here's another for us to try together. So I'm going to find f of g of x first. Again, this is composition of functions. So I'm finding f of 4x minus 1, which means I'm taking this function and I'm replacing x with 4x minus 1. So when I do that, I end up on the numerator. I have 4x minus 1, which is actually 4x minus 2 over 4. In reducing this, I find that I get x minus 1/2. But remember, if I don't get x, then I know that I did something wrong. So no, these are not inverses. I'm not even going to waste time doing g of f of x because it doesn't matter, because they both have to be true. Here's a question for you to try on your own. So press pause, try the question, and then press play to check your work. Now, it may look like I was being very mean to you in giving you a story problem, but essentially I haven't asked you to come up with anything on your own. I've given you the cost function, and I've given you the function g, and I'm asking, are they inverses of one another? So we're going to find c of g of x and see if we end up with x. So that means I'm finding c of 1/10 x minus 2, which means in this function, I'm replacing x with 1/10 x minus 2. 10 times 1/10 gives me 1, so 1x. 10 times minus 2 is minus 20. I have a plus 20 on the outside, and that leaves me with x. Because this worked, now I have to check g of c of x. So I'm finding g of 10x plus 20, which means I'm taking this function, 1/10, and instead of x, I'm writing 10x plus 20, and then minus 2. 1/10 times 10 is 1, so that's just 1x. 1/10 times 20 is 2. My minus 2 on the outside, those two will cancel, and that gives me x. And so yes, g of x is the inverse of c.